Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, whichever part of the world you are all listening to me. I'm Rupesh Bhatia. Very glad and excited to be here on Apex Hours session. And I'm going to talk to you today about how to build an architect mindset. Uh, in my full time role, I am the architect leader for a global consulting firm. I'm also a Salesforce MVP since 2019 and a big advocate of building the right mindset. Uh, Truly believe that the right mindset can lead you to places in your journey of Salesforce. So whether it is moving away from getting into the Salesforce ecosystem, starting in your development journey, getting into a consulting world, right, and from there moving into the core architecture world, it's all about having that right mindset so that we do small things on our day-to-day lives, which will allow us to get into those titles and designations that we all look for, right? So my talk today is not going to focus on how to achieve a title, but more of how do I think on a day-to-day basis, like a consultant, like an architect, so that I build the right mindset for my future growth as a professional. So I've launched a series way back, around a couple of years back, around D2C, like how to develop your consulting mindset, and it's under the brand of D2C. And you can find a lot of recorded sessions around that. Pre-sales was one such topic which I had covered on Apex Hours, which was greatly appreciated. A lot of people benefited out of it. Similarly, I've now coming up with a new series called Architect Mindset Series, which I'm going to brand it as C2A. And the reason I've named it as or labeled it as D2C or C2A, I'll just explain that to you in a moment why I've done that, right? So a bit more about myself. I'm Rupesh Bhatia, based out of Mumbai, India, and basically from the northern state of India called Rajasthan, but a true Mumbaikar by heart, and been in the Salesforce ecosystem for more than a decade. Been in the IT industry for almost 16 years now. Very passionate about solving complex problems with a very simplified lens of technology. And I'm truly a believer that unless you understand the customer's world or the business domain that you operate in, you'll not be able to apply the right solution. Technology is a vehicle which will allow you to go to places and solve customers' problems. So with that context, let's get into the core of it on why we are here today and what you are going to listen from me. All right. As I said earlier, why D2C and why C2A? So if I sit back and observe a Salesforce professional's journey, right? Right from entering into the ecosystem as using Trailhead or doing admin related work or being a developer, if you're coming from a development background, right? We are all wanting to become a consultant, right? And how do you get there? Because consultant, in its true form, right, will have a lot of client-facing opportunities, lot of interactions directly with the business, lot of travel opportunities, right, and lot of uh, value add to your own self as a professional, because you get to travel a lot, you get to understand different kind of business domains, you truly understand what kind of problem statements you're trying to solve for the business rather than just looking at it from a technical lens. So it's really a well rounded growth for us as professionals when you get into the consulting role. So D2C was more of how developers can move into a consultant role, and what kind of mindset you require to get there, right? What all things you should do on a day-to-day basis for you to reach there. Now, C2A is more of once I'm become a consultant, once I have those opportunities where I'm in front of the client or where I'm interacting with my day-to-day stakeholders, whether it's my onshore team or my own project team, right? What all things I should keep in mind so that I can build that architect mindset, right? And this session is specifically for all aspiring architects who really want to get into the world of architecture. To be honest, people or practitioners or professionals, right, in the Salesforce world who have spent some amount of time in the Salesforce ecosystem, let's say around 3 to 5 years, would have this natural inclination of moving towards the architectural world. Couple of reasons maybe, right? Good compensation or good recognition to your skill sets, right? Everybody in these age and times would like to get recognized as an architect, right? But I have a different view to this and a different lens to this, and that's what I'm going to share today, right? Architecture is not about just one project or solving one particular problem statement. It's about a journey, and that journey will be meaningful for you in your long career only if you're having the right mindset. And I'm going to focus today on this mindset topic rather than what all things you should be learning to become an architect, because I think there's enough and more content available out there uh, for you to really sharpen your skill sets on the technology or on the platform that you're working on to do justice for the role of an architect, right? So that's really why I've broken this down into two parts. One was D2C, this one is C2A, where I'm going to focus on how to get there as an architect. Now let's look at what all expectations are there from an architect, right? An architect is expected to first of all understand any given problem statement. Now, whether it is at a user story level or whether it is an RFP that you have received or whether it is a case study given to you, let's say in your CTA prep, right? In each of these scenarios, you're basically expected to understand what kind of pain points the case study has or the proposal or the RFP has been given for, what kind of objectives are there, what is their current pain point, right? You have to really understand why this has been created in first place. Why is this a case study in first place? Why there is a need for a proposal to be submitted, right? Why the client is looking for a new system in altogether? Why we have to develop all these new kind of integrations? Why Salesforce is the need of the hour for our clients, right? I think all of these why questions is something which is required for an architect to really get to the other side of the world, right, and understand what is that is troubling or what is that is uh, would make sense for the client and their end users for whom we will be building an application or implementing a project for, right? So really being curious, asking the questions and understanding the bigger picture, right? Because Salesforce on its own will not be the alone system in the landscape of a client, right? So when I'm getting into any project, I will always try to understand what is the system landscape in which we are operating, right? Because Salesforce is not going to be the only system in this landscape for this client, right? I need to understand what all my touch points are with Salesforce, what kind of forms and factors the end users will be accessing Salesforce, what kind of other legacy systems which will be interacting with Salesforce, what kind of middlewares, what kind of vehicles will I have to integrate or communicate data between different applications, different systems, different databases within that landscape. So really understanding why am I here, what am I going to do, how am I going to solve that problem, all of that will happen only if I as an architect will have the right questions to ask and then derive the right answers out of it as well, right? Because more often than not, your customers or your stakeholders will not have the exact answer for you based on your questions, but you'll have to work with them towards that right answer, right? So, and that leads to my second point over here, which is more of analysis, right? Analyze your problem statement and leverage the technical knowledge, the business knowledge, the domain knowledge that you have to really solve for the problem statement that you're really looking at, right? And how do you do that, right? Let's say I'm a sales cloud expert today, right? But I get a problem statement around service cloud. So continuous learning, upskilling, understanding the industry pain points, understanding what my customers' pain point are. Let's say I'm doing something for, let's say, a travel industry, right? And I get a problem statement. Unless I understand what kind of trends are currently going on in the travel industry, right? For me to relate to that business problem would be very difficult. I won't say impossible, but it would be really difficult for me to understand the nature of the problem and then apply the right knowledge so that I can solve for it using the technology and the tools that I have at my disposal, right? And I always envision us as architects as more of like doctors, right? When you go to a doctor, uh, the doctor will obviously ask you questions before they will give you any kind of medication, right? So that's the diagnosis part of it. And just like doctors, we as architects, whenever we get into projects, we have to ask the right questions. We have all the knowledge in the world, right? We know the technicalities of the platform, how we can build, how we can configure, what are the API constraints, what are the API limitations, how we can build those APIs. All of that knowledge we have about the platform, but whether that knowledge will be helpful for my customer, which is my patient, it will all depend upon what is the root cause of the problem, right? So that's where when you're into this phase of understanding and analyzing, I relate to it more of a diagnosis, which the doctor does with their patients. They ask questions, they try to understand, they will ask you for certain reports to be conducted so that they understand the pinpointed area where they need to give the medication for. And similarly to that, we as architect, once we understand that, right, we can solve that problem statement or that particular uh, complex problem in a very simplified way once we understand where exactly is the pain point. So with that, often as architects, right, one of the most ignored attribute or a trait of an architect is around expressing yourself when you're trying to diagnose something, when you're trying to give that solution. How are you expressing that solution back to your stakeholders, right? Are you presenting them? Are you giving them the right artifacts, right? Are you justifying your solution? Because one problem can have multiple solutions, can have multiple approaches. Are we thinking about the pros and cons of each and every solution or approach and documenting them and then expressing them in a way so that the business or the IT from the client side can understand what you're trying to do, right? How are you going to solve that problem? What's the long-term game plan for the implementation, the delivery approach? Is it scalable enough? Will it hold? Let's say today it's going to work for 10,000 users. Will it hold true for, let's say, 1 million users, right? So and so forth. So lot of things. You should be in a position to convince your stakeholders with your ability to express a solution uh, with the pros and cons and with proper data points as well, right? So that those are the expectations from an architect, which I would always relate to when I am on a project trying to solve a problem statement, right? With that, let's look into who is an architect, right? Uh, as I said earlier, everyone in the ecosystem who spend good amount of time doing development or an admin work would like to believe themselves that they can solve problems, right? Whether it is through a click and config or through programmatic way, we are all solving problems, which means that we are all architects at in some fashion or the other, right? So for me, an architect is simply someone who holds a technical expertise, right? Now, when I say technical expertise, it's not limited to just coding, right? It could be configuration as well. Using technology, you're trying to solve a problem. As simple as that. Business acumen, right? As I said earlier, unless you understand what kind of domain, what kind of industry you are operating in, or what kind of domain or industry your client is from, right? You will not be able to understand the actual problem statement. Not understand, I won't say that, but you will not be able to do full justice to your solution unless you understand the problem in its entirety, right? That's how I'll put it. So business acumen is very important to really relate to the business world, right? And then it's all about expressing, right? How are you expressing your solution in front of the stakeholders? How are you documenting those things? How are you able to explain it to your own team, right? Because they are the ones who are going to deliver it for you, who are going to implement it for you. Are you able to simplify that whole design that you have come up with in a very simplified way so that your dev team can pick that up and start implementing them, right? Or the tech leads along with you who are working with you on your project on a day-to-day basis, can they understand what you're trying to come up with? Can they understand your data model? Can they understand what kind of integration patterns you're trying to implement? Can they understand why you are suggesting a solution in a particular way, right? The ability to communicate is all about my ability to convey my messaging to my audience in a very effective way. Let's look at the skills, right? As an architect, right? If I look at it from a skill standpoint, I am someone who would be acting as a trusted advisor for my client, for my project team. They will trust whatever I say because they would look up to me as a trusted advisor, right? Because I hold the right knowledge, because they would be trust on me because I understand enough of the business domain and I can communicate in an effective way about my solution, make them explain the design trade-offs and justify my solution that this is going to work, right? And obviously all of these things, trusted advisor is a very powerful word. This will not come to you on day one, but this will come to you over a period of time when you start practicing all of this on a day-to-day on your project while you deliver your role as an architect, right? Over a period of years, when you're working with similar teams, similar kind of clients, right, from the same industry, you'll hold your expertise, and that's the experience and expertise which will give you this recognition or the skill set of being a trusted advisor, right? So this is not a day one trait, but over a period of time, you will work towards getting this skill set. Someone who looks at the bigger picture, as I said earlier, right? So when you go to a doctor, you're not going to get the medicines just by saying that I'm having a trouble, let's say in my stomach or in my head, right? But you're going to say, this is where my pain is, right? And the doctor will start diagnosing it, right? And it's the doctor who will connect the dots between the reports that will be created and the symptoms that you will be sharing with them, right? So similarly, an architect would look at the requirement, look at the user stories, look at the problem statement, and then uh, understand a bit more about the system landscape, which all systems Salesforce is interacting with, what kind of personas the Salesforce will cater to, what kind of business my client is into, who are my end users who are going to use my application, what kind of systems are going to talk to my Salesforce application. So that gives me my integration clarity. What kind of data I'm supposed to hold in this application? How much data will how much data that will be accumulated over a period of years, right, on a year-on-year basis. So that will give me some inclination of what kind of data volumes I should be looking at. Is there a data migration scenario in this project? How much data I'm going to migrate? Is there any content related work, right? How much content I need to migrate? How much data I need to migrate? All of this will allow you to think in different areas and really do justification to your solution when you're coming up with those design approaches or the solutions to be implemented. So looking at a bigger picture is very crucial for an architect. Practice empathy while solutioning, right? So when you're thinking about a solution, don't just think about solving that problem statement from a technical lens, right? A solution works only well as long as it is adopted well, right? So we normally, as architect or as technical people, we don't give enough importance to the adoption of that solution. I think that's very important when ultimately it's the end user who's going to use your application, right? Whether it is interfacing your data or building custom UI, right? Or building an automated logic. I think the end beneficiary of all of this work that you're doing is the end user. As long as they are comfortable with the solution that you're going to put up, I think that's really what it matters. And that's why I say practice empathy while thinking about a solution in your own mind, right? Will it work for my end users? Recommend best solution with trade-offs. As I said, like there could be multiple approaches or multiple solutions to a given problem statement. Always recommend which one is the best one and why do you think it is the best one, right? What is your justification on that this solution is going to work given the context of a requirement, given the context of the end user, given the context of the system landscape? And that's why I think this is going to work in the long term, right? And as an architect, there are lots of people within your team, within your company who will be looking up to you as an architect, right? So you also act as an influencer. So one aspect of being an architect is also how do you influence others, right, on their journey as well. I know it's really not required to really for you to play the role of an architect, but I think as an architect we owe it back to our people with whom we work on a day-to-day basis, back to the broader community, right? The fact that I'm doing this session today or recording this session is because I want to give back to the Salesforce community. All the aspiring architects out there, I want to share my knowledge with you. Whatever I have experienced in my career all these years, this is what I'm bringing to the table today. And the expectations, right? So these are all the skills which you should have in your pockets so that you can come true to these expectations as well, right? People, whether it's your company, whether it's your project, or whether it's your client, they will expect you to design for scalability, performance, and security. Design for an org strategy. If your client is new to Salesforce and they're looking for an org strategy, they will expect the architect on the program to come and propose an org strategy. Design the data model, design the data and process related integrations, identity and access, security model, DevOps strategy. These are all expectations when you're starting off on a new project, or even if you're joining an existing project. These are the areas where I would spend my time on and invest and try to learn how all of these things have been implemented, right? For me to get a granular control of what's going on in the implementation, where exactly things will go wrong, right? If certain things are breaking, why those things are breaking. This gives me enough and more tool sets and knowledge for me to go and diagnose something, right? Account for large data volumes when you're dealing with projects in terms of data migration or even in integration scenarios, right? If you're getting data into Salesforce on a year-on-year basis, how much data is going to grow? What's your data archival strategy? What's your data backup and restore strategy, right? Any data privacy or visibility needs, any encryption needs, right? Any compliance or regulatory related requirements. Advocate always for the best practices. Mentor your devs or admins on the project. Someone who can review the code, right? As architects, we may not be expected to do the actual coding on a day-to-day basis, but someone should be able to, someone who can easily go into a Salesforce environment or a GitHub and read through the code, understand the logic that's been implemented, and guide the team on how to correct if they are not implemented the best practice, or if they have a logic which is faulty or will fault given a scenario, right? Someone who can also look at industry level tech trends and come up with POVs, come up with POCs. If there's something new which Salesforce is planning to come up with, understand how it's going to impact your client, understand how it's going to impact a particular industry, and bring in your thought process to the table so that, coming back to my earlier point of being a trusted advisor, right? All of these will enable you to get into that zone of being a trusted advisor. If you're practicing all of this on a day-to-day basis, on the projects that you're operating on, for your clients, for your people. Let me introduce you to a new concept. And again, this is not something very complex, but a protocol called TCP, which I normally follow while I was going through my journey of becoming an architect, right? I focused on three things, and I think this is going to help a lot of you all who are listening to this session. First is the technology piece, right? There's often a misconception or a myth that architects are all about having the right knowledge or it's all about technology, right? I think technology is one lens to it where we as an architect need to excel on. Continuous skilling, upskilling is all part of that. Salesforce is one just product, right? I think as architects mature over the years, you have to start thinking beyond Salesforce as well, look into other technologies, adjacent technologies, and understand really the landscape, right? And that's where I think you get matured as an architect and start playing into the enterprise landscape as well. So with that context, right, the other two areas are not often talked about is the communication piece and the people aspect of it, right? And I think all these three lenses are important when you are growing as an architect or when you're thinking of becoming an architect. So technology or the knowledge that you have is one aspect of it. The other two aspects of it are communication and people. Uh, Communication, as I said earlier, in your day-to-day role of an architect, there will be n number of opportunities throughout your project where you'll have to express yourself as an architect, right? Where you'll have to present your solution, where you'll have to document your design, where you have to go and convince someone that why your solution is going to work, right? So all of that will happen only if you're a good communicator. I'm not talking about good English. I'm just talking about someone who can express themselves in a very simplified way so that the audience to whom you're communicating with can understand your language, right? Now, whether you're interacting with your business people or whether you're interacting with the technical folks within your own team or cross technical team, right? Ability for you to translate the business terminologies into a technical world and vice versa. When you take your questions from or doubts or issues from your dev team or your technical team and go and present it in front of your business stakeholders, there you cannot just explain them the technicalities of your problem statement, right? You have to really explain it in a very simplified way that we are trying this logic and that's why it's not working. Can you tell me what's exactly your requirement and will it work for you, right? So you have to simplify it to a level where your business users can understand what you're trying to convey and vice versa. When business comes back and says that this is what we expected, this is not has been delivered in your sprint, our understanding was this versus what you have delivered is something else. You have to go back to your technical team and make them understand that this is where it was not done in a proper way, right? So I think it's a two-way scenario for communication. You have to really ace that game if you want to succeed as an architect on your projects and in general in your career. With people, all throughout my scenarios that I try to explain, it's all about interaction with people, right? Whether it's your client, whether it's your business or IT stakeholders, whether it's your own project team, whether it's an onshore offshore model where you interact with your own colleagues from the other parts of the world. I think understanding what people we as human exist, whether it's our culture, whether it's our background for where we are coming from, I think having that empathetic view, having that knowledge about each other, knowing each other better will allow you to grow as an architect, right? I think in this professional world of ours, I think more than the role, I think what will remain with you is our networking and the relationships that we build on projects. So that's why I say for an architect to succeed, it's important to build those relationships, build those networks so that you can grow as an architect as well. Whether it is your client side architects, whether it's your onshore architects with whom you're interacting with, build those relationships which will allow you to grow, not just in terms of technical knowledge, but also in terms of getting a deeper understanding of the business, getting a deeper understanding where exactly the problem statement is. I think it's all part of our diagnosis when we're trying to solve something, right? Uh, One more aspect of people is mentoring and coaching. Give it back to your own people. If you think there is someone who's looking out for help, share your experience, right? It will allow them to grow as well. All right, so that's my TCP protocol. How can we build that protocol? I think I've explained that enough. Around technology, it's more about how do I build my knowledge over the years, right? I will focus on training and certifications. When I'm delivered a project, I think more than the project delivery, what I would be interested in is what kind of learnings I've derived out of that project, right? If I'm on a project, let's say for 6 months, 12 months, what are the key learnings out of that project which will stay with me forever and which will allow me to do a better job in my next project? What kind of pursuits or proposals I have worked upon? Because again, different kind of landscapes, different case studies will only allow me to better myself as an architect. And that's where I think we all as architects should be doing pre-sales work more often than not, so that uh, our exposure on projects, client projects, are limited to the landscape that we are operating in. And I've seen many architects spending years and months on the same project. I think it kind of limits your exposure. How do you get that exposure is through working through these pre-sales opportunities or the pursuits, right? You get to understand a different landscape altogether, different sets of clients, different kinds of industries, so that you get enough exposure for yourself to evolve as an architect. Uh, Communication, yeah, as I said, it's all about expressing yourself. Now, to express yourself, you need documentation, you need facts versus assumptions, you need to understand what kind of risk we will get into if we don't do certain things in the right way. If the technical solutions might also have certain risks, right? What's our mitigation plan? You, as an architect, right? If you are the trusted advisor or if you are the SME on the program, you are expected to have all possible solutions, and most of the times not just plan A but with plan B as well. If certain things don't work, what is my plan B, right? And that's where solution options is so much critical on what we do on a day-to-day basis, that for a given problem, we have to first understand, we have to analyze, and then come up with multiple options and recommend which one is the best one of them, right? Why you think this is going to work, right? And you may not be right always, but I think it will allow you to better yourself as an architect. On the people side, I think I've touched on almost all the topics. Just one pointer over here, which I've not spoken about, is the diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think in these age and times, it's important on uh, the people with whom we are working, right? Whether it's male practitioners, female practitioners, any other gender, right? It's important that we take everybody along. Uh, this point is not directly related to the architecture role, but I think it's important for us to operate as architect on projects. You will just evolve as a better professional. All right. I've been talking about this mindset a lot, right, in this session. To me, it's a thought process, right? Even if I'm doing coding as a developer, if I'm thinking or looking at the bigger picture on my project, I'm asking the right questions. I'm coming up with possible solutions and recommending them, right? Even if you're a developer or an admin, you can do all of this. As long as you're thinking in the right direction, as an architect, I think that's what it matters, right? You might not be there as an architect, operating as a full-time architect, but the fact that you're thinking about the problem statement, the fact that you're trying to come up with solutions, the fact that you're able to communicate your solutions to your tech leads or to your team leads or to your architects on the project, I think you're starting to build that mindset, right? And for you to elevate your role from a developer or an admin or a consultant to an architect, I think these are the traits which are required for you to build that mindset, right? And as I said, architect is a journey. The moment you start thinking around these aspects will allow you to get onto that journey and become an architect one day. All right, with that, I'll come to the crux of it, right? What are those steps which I need to think about, right, to build this mindset? Now, I've just taken a stab at it from my own experience, right? When I get into a new project, which are those things which I would normally think about, right? So right from starting from org strategy to what kind of licenses the client has purchased, or what kind of personas who are going to use my application, what's the license type associated to them, right? Trying to understand all of that, and I have some sub bullet points which will give you enough pointers to think through, right? Am I, so when you go back to your own projects after listening this, you have to start thinking, okay, have I ever thought about these areas on my own project? Or if you're getting into a new project, next time you're going to think about these possible areas, right? And then come up with your org strategy and your licensing strategy, right? Because it is not just about uh, implementing a particular solution, right? It's also about how are you setting it up the right way for your client. Ultimately, it's the business is going to get benefited once the system is live, right? So understanding what kind of personas are there, what kind of licenses you're going to assign to those personas, understanding who's the account executive, right? Specifically in the Salesforce world, it's the AE who's going to sell those licenses. So understanding what was the perspective from an account executive standpoint, why those licenses or types were suggested in first place will also give you a better understanding as an architect, how you want to shape up your solution in the long run. Business presence and process alignment, IT landscape, regulations, compliances, data strategy, time to market, right? All of these, I think, are essential for you to come up with the right strategy. System landscape, I think I've spoken enough about it. What kind of applications, what kind of integrations are going to happen, data flows from which system act as master source of truth for a particular data element. What kind of actors are going to use my system, what kind of devices they are going to use, what kind of uh, network layer configurations I need to do or consider within the system landscape so that an on-premise system can communicate with a cloud solution, or a cloud application won't want to talk with another cloud application in the landscape. What kind of communication patterns, security, performance, all these things you should be thinking as an architect, right? When it comes to data flow diagrams, you often talk about what is my source to target mapping, which system will act as a system of record, what kind of data volumes I'm going to handle, what's my transactional volumes, what kind of data security I'm going to put in place so that data is not accessible during transit, uh, or in the source of the target system, what kind of controls I will have so that it's available to the right user based on the accessibility, based on the visibility rules that I might have to configure. Data architecture, again, it begins right from your data modeling, the design of the data, or the objects that in the Salesforce world, the standard and the custom objects, how you're going to set it up, what kind of data migration requirements you have, what kind of integration requirements you have, what kind of security controls you need to have, right? And so on and so forth will define your data architecture. Integration architecture will go a bit uh, in whatever I've spoken about data architecture. Integration architecture will include all of that. Along with that, it will also have identity and accessibility, right? Who is my user who's going to push data into Salesforce or in any other system? How are they going to log in? How are you going to authenticate that user versus authorize that user on accessing a data? And what kind of patterns I'm going to use, right? Whether it's a fire and forget scenario, or whether it's a request and response scenario, right? Uh, or you're going to use platform events, or you're going to use CDC, or you're going to use data virtualization. All of these things, I think it's important for us to understand what are my options and how am I going to solve this. DevOps and governance, I think it's very important you as an architect to understand what kind of DevOps processes I'm going to implement and what's going to be my overall governance, so that the implementation of the project is of the top-notch quality. I think quality is one aspect where we all architects get measured against, and DevOps and governance will allow you to ensure that your quality of the implementation is not taken a hit. You might have the best of the designs, but unless it is implemented in the right way, unless the code repositories and the code versioning are all in place, you'll never be able to implement those designs and ensure that the project is getting delivered on time with the right quality, with the designs that you had in mind on day one. That's what exactly is going into production on day 100, right? Uh, so all of these are important things. I've just tried to give my perspective on what all things you should be thinking about. It might not be 100% correct, right? There might be few things which I've missed, or there might be few things which you think is not the right fit over here. welcome to any kind of feedback on all of this content because I really want to hear more from all of the architects around the globe, uh, if I'm thinking in the right way or not. So just giving an example over here around data integration architecture, right? I know I've explained you the whole TCP protocol. I just wanted to lay down this as an example. So when I talk about data and integration architecture, and if I think of applying the TCP protocol for this module of architecture, then I would probably think about all of these areas, right? When it comes to technology, it will be like databases, platforms, jobs, optimization so that the data sync happens in the right way, security of the data, quality of the data, certificates involved when two systems are interacting with each other, encryption at rest, encryption in transit, compliance related scenarios where data cannot reside in a particular geography, right? Data has to meet certain industry standards, whether it's HIPAA compliance for healthcare industry or any other industry specific compliance and regulatory requirements would influence your architectural thought process around data and integration, right? And when it comes to communication, I think it's about what kind of documents you are maintaining, whether it's specifications on integration or data mapping documents for your migration scenarios, whether it is capturing the whole of your data model within Salesforce into a data dictionary, uh, coming up with a data load strategy, right? Coming up with risk scenarios and mitigation plans, and for integration requirements, coming up with which patterns you're going to use. All of this, I think you need to maintain it somewhere. Uh, some projects would use certain tools or certain platforms to maintain all of this documentation. Some projects or some companies would maintain it in their own different templatized manner. But I think we as an architect need to really understand how are we documenting it and what are the broad level points that we need to capture. From a people standpoint, I think it's the end users, right? Ultimately, it's the end users who is going to use this data. The project teams involved, it need not be just the Salesforce teams. It would be teams across different applications, different systems. It client stakeholders with whom you're going to interact, whether it's business or IT, onshore teams if your company is working in an onshore offshore model, and cross-platform teams, right? So these are all the people with whom I'm going to interact when I'm going to work in a data architecture space, right? So this TCP protocol basically gives me a thought process that these are the things which I should keep in mind as an architect, and I need to work on it, right? Let's look at the journey of an architect, right? I've spoken about the TCP protocol. I've spoken about different steps that you need to take to build that mindset. Now, let's say you're there as an architect, right? You have worked as an architect on a couple of projects. Uh, this is one more observation from my side that architects are are not having that clarity where exactly they're operating in their current role. That's why I've tried to come up with this depth versus breadth kind of a reference diagram. So we as Salesforce architects, right, we typically operate in the 7 domain, or these are our aligned to our designer certifications that we have, right? So when somebody does a CAA or a CSA, right, we typically tend to think that we are there as an architect, right? But I think these are the basic building blocks on how we should start thinking on any implementation project. In addition to these, I think these domain areas do not really cover the environment and licensing strategy or the org level strategy, whether it's single org or multi org, or a DevOps strategy or a mobile strategy, right? I think these are adjacent areas which we all as an architect should think through on our projects, irrespective of these basic building blocks, right? Now, this is the technology piece that I was talking about in my framework of TCP, right? Now, on top of this, obviously, we do a lot of solution and design, which is config versus code or using uh, Apex or batch framework or error handling or Aura or an LWC, right? We all build all of this design using this platform. And then there is this element of build versus buy, right? And in a Salesforce world, it's more about whether I can plug in the right app from the app exchange. for my solution to be delivered, right? Now, till this, we are all talking about the technical aspect of it. The the top aspect of it is more about what kind of domain or what kind of domain you're operating on, right? Whether it's a B2B scenario or a B2C scenario or a lead to quote scenario or a lead to cash scenario, right? Based on the kind of business processes you're trying to implement, you need to relate which kind of domain you're operating on, right? And why is this important for an architect to understand all of this is because you need to understand what kind of business problems you're trying to solve as an architect over a period of years. And you need to build your expertise in a particular domain so that you evolve as an architect, right? Because technology, again, as I said, is one aspect of it, but you'll have to grow yourself into the business space as well. Understand these domains, understand once you have an expertise, let's say in a B2B scenario or a B2C scenario, you have to go on the other side of the spectrum and understand, okay, if I've done enough of lead to quote kind of projects, can I go beyond and start working on a B2B scenario or on a B2C scenario? And I think Salesforce has also come up with the solution architect certifications to address scenarios where you are doing a Salesforce implementation, but in a multi-cloud scenario, right? So that's where I've listed. You can have marketing, sales, service, experience cloud, and commerce cloud. I think I missed commerce over here, but these are the 5 areas or elements which will allow you to understand which particular domain I am operating as an architect, right? And all of this for me, right, when you are building something on Salesforce, is all front office because these applications are going to be used by the actual users, and this is my front end that I'm building, right? And obviously there is a bunch of middlewares that are often used in your system landscape. There are a bunch of back office systems. There are a bunch of boundary systems, right, which are not in direct integration with your Salesforce as a CRM solution, but they will be benefiting out of the data that gets generated in Salesforce or something, or they might be generating data which might be consumed by Salesforce at the end of the day, right? So systems like MDM, systems like legacy apps, right, or other cloud hosted apps would be boundary systems who are may or may not directly interacting with Salesforce, right? Back office systems like ERP, order processing, fulfillment, billing, revenue recognition, right? Shipping and logistics. Logistics. Again, it's not a comprehensive list. All of these systems I have seen in multiple landscapes, and that's why I was able to put them over here. And the bottom layer to this is the network and infrastructure. When you're dealing with the cloud versus on-premise kind of a setup, or when you need a dedicated IP setup to access something, or you have a DMZ zone within the network infra of the client, you have to set up all of that so that the communication between Salesforce, which is a cloud hosted solution, and something which is on premise, or let's say within AWS or GCP, some of the other cloud hosted apps, that communication can happen in a secured way, in a more trusted way, and there is no hiccups when you go live, right? So that's really for me the depth and the breadth aspect of it. So as an architect, let's say I've started with a sales cloud project. Over the years, I will have to figure out which domain I need to operate and which industry I need to hold my expertise on, but also start thinking more broadly, right? Go beyond Salesforce and understand different middleware technologies, understand what kind of systems you typically interact with, and try to get a more deeper understanding and a broader understanding of the landscape that you're operating in. And that to me really is your gateway to growing yourself as an architect into the enterprise world as well. Again, this is my view of what I think over the years have worked for me in my mind. I'm pretty sure you all would have different perspectives to it. Looking forward to hear more from you all. With that, if there is any feedback for this session, do let me know. Give me a shout out on Rupesh Bhatia 85. And if you have any feedback to write, drop me an email on developer2consultant@gmail.com. Again, this email was generated as part of the D2C series, and I'm continuing with that. So even for the C2A series or the Architect Mindset series, if you have any kind of feedback, happy to hear more from you. With that, I'll wrap up my session and give it back to Amit. Thank you, Amit, for giving me this opportunity and platform to have this interaction with your audience. It was great. I really loved talking over here, and over to you.